this CentremapsLive video. Today we're looking at flood reports, and in particular the FloodSmart range of reports, and we're lucky enough to have Martin with us today from GeoSmart. So Martin, yeah, I think everyone's seen plenty of flooding going on. It's not really stopped raining that long over the last 6 to 12 months. Flood reports are not a new thing, and then requirements have been in place for some time in a lot of areas, but do change. When are you seeing people requiring flood reports, and what information is the flood report trying to bring together for say, a developer or somebody going through planning?
Sure. You mentioned flooding has been around for a while. It's certainly been getting worse over the last decade or so, but the requirements in terms of planning have been set for some time. So if you are looking to develop a site and it's in a flood zone called 2 or 3, which is basically an area which is known to flood from a river, or you're in a high-risk zone of surface water or groundwater flooding, then you will need to provide a flood risk assessment as part of that. Also, if you're developing a very large site, so anything that's over 1 hectare in size, there will also be a requirement to undertake a flood risk assessment. And at GeoSmart we do that through our product range called FloodSmart. At GeoSmart we specialise in groundwater. That's where our businesses come out of, and we create groundwater data sets which get used in various other reports and transactions. But there's 4 key types of flooding. Any flood risk assessment should always look at least at 4 key types, which are surface water flooding, which is called pluvial, river flooding, fluvial, tidal flooding, and groundwater flooding. The other types of flooding we will also check on are canals and also reservoir failure, although those two are pretty unlikely. And the final one is sewer flooding as well, so it is possible in some instances to have sewer flooding. But the main 4 types that any flood risk assessment would look at would be those others. And they all interact with each other as well. So it's one sort of quite complicated picture at times. And obviously where we are in the country can affect the types of flooding we might experience, which is linked to ground conditions. So the geology and the soil types will determine what types of flooding are more likely to occur. So something that's always been around for a long time, if people close their eyes and imagine flooding, it's rivers that have flooded huge areas, low-lying areas, but over the last decade or 2 decades really, it's very heavy rainfall events have started to become a much more normal thing for us, which we didn't really experience in the past. So surface water flooding has become more of a problem. We can do something to try and combat that around sustainable drainage, but really we can end up with urban centres in particular with huge lakes of water, which we didn't used to get so much in the past, which has become much more of a problem. The other types of flooding have been around more, we're more experienced with those, but surface water flooding is adding a lot as well. So some local authorities are really keen on this. They will have extra requirements around surface water flooding. So I mentioned that before, normally it's just in a high-risk zone of surface water flooding. Yeah. For some local authorities, they would consider any type of surface water flooding to be a risk, so we would sometimes do flood risk assessments for much lower risk sites.
Yeah, and the data sets around that have changed a lot over the years. I know it used to be people looking at postcode level, and obviously we're going to right down now to local ponding in very specific areas, given the data we've got on surface heights and variation.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite fragmented in this country. It is England, Scotland and Wales. We have SEPA, we have Natural Resources Wales, and we have the Environment Agency, and they separately create and manage flood data for tidal, river and surface, but they're not joined up particularly. The 4th one, groundwater, most people in the UK use the GeoSmart groundwater map, so we provide that data. But what we've done with FloodSmart Analytics, which I know isn't the key part of this talk, is we've created our own versions of each of the regional bodies' flood maps, and then brought those together into one model, added in our own groundwater, and that just allows us to get an initial look on the type and risk of flooding at any property in the UK. So that's something we've been doing. But the different agencies will also update their flood maps. Typically every 5 years they might update each region, but it's still very crude at this stage. It's sort of on a 5 metre grid or greater. And some places can look like they're at a great risk of flooding, when actually if we drill down into it, perhaps it's not so bad.
So the FloodSmart reports, obviously the solution you've got, what I think we already talked a little bit, variation depending on whether you're in flood zone 1 or 2 or 3. What does the report deliver, and how does it help you to convey the risk to your site when you're sort of trying to present that onwards to planning?
So we have 3 reports in the FloodSmart range. So we just have our FloodSmart product, which is for all developments in a flood zone, a river flood zone 1.
Right.
Surface water flooding is much easier for us to look at than river flooding. Our FloodSmart Plus is for any site that's in any type of flood zone, so 1, 2 or 3, and is at high risk of flooding. And then we also have a FloodSmart Pro, sometimes which is for us to go to site as well and take a look at the site. We tend not to do that so often, but if there is existing flood mitigation on site, or it's not a planning project, it's actually a due diligence, a purchase, or something like that, we may actually be interested in going to look at what flood resilience is already there on a property.
Right. And how does what kind of format does the report take in terms of, is it just a breakdown of the risk, or does it help with statements that can be sort of put forward to a plan?
We'll take an example. We're looking to develop a site. It's going to be a commercial unit, and it's in a flood zone 2 or 3 for a river. So that means at some point in time it is going to be flooded. We need to make sure that whatever is being designed is safe from flooding. It has to do 2 things. One, itself be safe from flooding, and secondly, not push the cause of flooding elsewhere. So it's an existing area that can flood. You can't just go and put something in that, because that flood water that would have been on the site will now be pushed somewhere else, and somebody else's property or farm, whatever it might be, could be flooded instead. So we have to do both of those things, make sure the thing is safe itself, and also that we don't increase the risk of flooding. So there's a lot of other things that are sometimes involved. You could put your building on stilts, say, or make sure your floor levels are above the flood level. That's great. That's a way of mitigating. So we might have things for the architect to consider as part of their design. If we do, however, want to take away an area that can flood, we need to do something called a floodplain compensation assessment. And somewhere within the red line boundary of that site, that flood volume will have to be accommodated for. So it's a serious consideration, and definitely something that people should look at very early on, because if you can't compensate for it, it is a simple no in planning terms. You must provide compensation for any volume you want to take away.
Sure. Yeah, not worth leaving till massive investments of stage has taken place.
Exactly, yeah.
If you want to find out any more about the FloodSmart range of products, you can find on the interface alongside the mapping, environmental reports, contaminated land sort of challenges that those deal with. Or you're more than welcome to get in touch and let us know a site that you're trying to deal with and what challenges you're experiencing. Thanks again to Martin.
Thank you very much.
Do watch out for our other videos in the series. Thanks very much.